welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing a series review for the Truth series by Don Cook. So that includes First Truth, Hidden Truth, Forgotten Truth, and Lost Truth. So this is a series that I recently reread and I loved rereading it. I really wasn't sure how the reread was going to go, but I had so much fun reading this series. So this is a fantasy series that is set in a world where there are pretty much three main regions, which are the foothills, the plains, and the coast. And there is a rivalry between the foothills and the plains, and then the coast is just kind of like off doing its own thing. And our main character is named Alyssa. She lives in the foothills, but her mother is from the plains and her father was from the foothills. And it is almost unheard of for people from the plains and the foothills to intermingle and have children and get married. And people are very suspicious of her and they call her a half-breed, and she's very isolated because of this. Now, Alyssa's father died when she was very young and she continues to live in the foothills with her mother. But when she was a child, her father used to tell her stories about magic and about this place called the Hold, where masters and keepers learned and taught magic. And Alyssa doesn't really believe in magic or really believe that the Hold exists. She thinks these are just things from her father's stories. But then one day her mother tells her that her father had magic and that she suspects Alyssa has inherited his magic and that she has to go find this place, the Hold, so that she can learn how to use her magic. And so she's thrust out into the world to find her way to the Hold because her mom is just kind of like, you'll figure it out, you'll be drawn there somehow with magic. So she's just kind of like thrown out into the world to find her way to the Hold, which Alyssa doesn't even really believe exists. And on her way, Alyssa encounters a traveling minstrel from the plains, and the two of them at first really do not get along. They butt heads, but they end up traveling together because they're headed in the same direction. And when they do eventually reach the Hold, they find that it is pretty much abandoned, that almost all of the masters and keepers are gone. The only one left is one keeper named Balak, who has some ulterior motives and is hoping to use Alyssa and her potential powers for his own gain, especially regarding a certain magical book that both of them are searching for. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the world building in this series, because I really enjoyed the world building. Now, the world building is not expansive, but I really loved the way that it was done because I think that you get a really strong feel for this world and the cultures in it. Right away, we start to understand the world and context and culture of this world through the characters' eyes. We see a culture clash and conflicts between certain characters because of that. But then also these characters start to learn about each other's cultures, and we learn about the history and the animosity between them that has kept them really ignorant of each other's cultures. But even though there's been very little contact between the two of them, we also get to see all of these little cultural details and customs that they have in common and things that are different from one another. And I just really loved how smoothly integrated the culture and the world building was done through these character POVs and just like these little interactions and little details about them. One thing that was unexpected to me, since I had forgotten a lot about this series, was that the story kind of gets into almost like magical population control or population manipulation. But also in the way that they explain this, they use like scientific terms. So they use words like neurons and recessive genes and alleles. And I just was like, I don't know how I feel about them. Like, it just like didn't match, you know, like the types of language just didn't match this like fantasy world. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. It wasn't a big deal, but it was like something that I kind of was like, I would have rather you just made up like a magical way of explaining recessive genes. The pacing of the story is probably on the slower side, and the story mostly takes place in one location. There's a little bit of traveling at the beginning of the series and a little bit of traveling at the end, but the majority of the series is really taking place in one location. There's a lot of time spent learning magic. There's a lot of describing magic, a lot of experimenting with magic, making mistakes with magic, teaching magic. I felt like the tropes of the story were very much like common YA tropes, which I'll talk a little bit more about the tropes a little later, but I felt like the tropes were more like a YA book, but the pacing of it felt a little bit more like an adult book because it was more slowly paced. But the story is really focused on and motivated by the characters and the relationships. And I think that was also one of the strengths of this series, was that I really enjoyed these characters so much. Now, of course, over the course of the series, we gain more and more characters as we go, but I'll just mention a couple of the characters that show up in the first book. So of course our main character is Alyssa. She in a lot of ways is a standard YA protagonist, and I can also see people getting annoyed with her possibly because of that, but I ended up really liking her, even though she could be really frustrating at times. But I just felt like for each of the kind of frustrating things about her character, there was something that kind of balanced it out, or like blunted the edges, or made it just something that didn't bother me that much. Like, she's one of those characters who kind of always gets her way with stubbornness and a plucky attitude, which is something that usually really annoys me. But in this case, it felt very consistent with her character. I also, in a lot of situations, understood why she was being stubborn about the things that she was being stubborn about. But also I felt like she had just enough self-awareness to make her less annoying. A little bit of self-awareness can go a long way with me, and she had just enough to often, when she really made mistakes, to feel contrite and sometimes even apologize, and I liked that about her and made this trait like a little bit less annoying. There are also situations where she's able to like do things that no one else can do, and like even though she's just now learning magic, somehow she can do things that like even the masters can't achieve. And that also is something that can be really annoying, but eventually we do get a reason or an explanation for why that's the case, and it makes sense, and it worked for me. I don't know. But one thing that did kind of actually just annoy me about her character is that she often is kind of thoughtless, and she does make some stupid decisions. So that was something that just annoyed me, and I don't have anything to make that better. And as a character, Alyssa doesn't always have a lot of tact. Sometimes she just kind of barrels forward and hopes for the best and messes up a lot of things along the way. But I did really like that she's very like staunch in her convictions, and like sometimes the way she handles it is immature, but she really will stand up for what she believes in, and she will go to the ends of the earth for the people that she cares about. And she really inspires courage in other people, which I really liked about her. And I do think that she grows over the course of the series. So overall, I really enjoyed her character, even though there were some times where I just was like, what are you doing? Then there's Strel, who is the traveling minstrel from the plains that she meets. He is from a family of plains craftsmen, and he is also a very stubborn character, and he also is very prideful. And the two of them really like clash at first, but they also really learn to work together, and I ended up just really loving Strel and the two of them together, and just like their whole dynamic. I just really liked his character. Then there is Talon, who is her Ellis's like bird animal companion, who is just great. And then there is an antagonist named Balak, who is the keeper that we meet in the first book, who has some ulterior and nefarious motives. And as a character, I don't know if he didn't necessarily feel super villainous, and there were times that we kind of had to learn like, oh, maybe he's actually more dangerous than he seems, but he also didn't always seem like he was actually that dangerous, so I'm not sure how well he worked as a villain, but he also is not the primary focus of the entire series. And then over the course of the series, we meet new characters. Some of them I loved, some of them I hated, and the ones that I hated, like, I hated them in a good way, and there were some characters that just that I love their relationship to Alyssa. She has a mentor character who I really love. There are actually a couple characters who mentor her, but there's one primary mentor figure that she has. There's also a friend of hers who she has kind of like a brotherly relationship with. I do wish that there were more female characters in the books, or more female characters who were consistent throughout the books, because Alyssa is pretty much the only female character that is in the entire series. But speaking of relationships, there is also a love triangle. And I know that a lot of people don't like love triangles. Personally, it's not a favorite trope of mine, but I also don't just like hate them on principle, and I thought this one was kind of fun. Really, I just enjoyed all of the characters so much that the trope didn't bother me. And also, this has both a like antagonist to friends to lovers slow burn romance, and also like a predestined I've waited hundreds of years for you romance. It has both in this love triangle. So I really enjoyed it. Now, I remember being much more conflicted about the love triangle and like who she should end up with, but reading it again now, I feel like it's both very clear in the book as to who she's going to choose, and also I had a clear favorite while reading the series. But it does take a little while for the love triangle to get going, because one of the characters doesn't come in until a little bit later in the books. But once he does, the two guys who are in this end up having kind of a friendly rivalry between the two of them, which Alyssa does encourage. And I had kind of mixed feelings about Alyssa's role in all of this, because there were definitely times where it felt like she was being kind of selfish. But then we also find out that she kind of has reasons for doing things the way she's doing them, however misguided they are. So yeah, I had some mixed feelings about how Alyssa was like handling the situation of the love triangle. But in addition to a love triangle trope, this series has so many other tropes or story elements in it. There's just like, there's something for everybody. It has an abandoned magic school, there's a cursed city, there's telepathy, ghosts, dragons, shapeshifters, animal companions, there's time travel and a sea voyage. They're just like, there's a little bit of everything in it. And I just had such a great time reading this series. It is a fairly like quiet, I think, and contained story, but I was like so invested in it, and I just enjoyed these characters so much. And when I wasn't reading it, I kept thinking about it like that, and that to me is like the sign of a really good story, is when once I put the book down, I keep thinking about it even while I'm doing other things, and I want to come back to it. So even though there are some things about the series I could definitely see people maybe getting annoyed with, I think it's a really fun series. I gave the first book 4 stars, the second book 3.5 stars, and the third and fourth book both 4 stars. So that is all for my review of the Truth series by Dawn Cook. I'd love to chat with you guys about it in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!